the intelligence agencies took over the United States of America in a hostile coup against John F. Kennedy. And then Nixon comes in like a few years later and is like essentially taken over as well. But they get the American people to believe that like what that was a corrupt president being ousted.
Well, it's also easy to frame Nixon that way because he's ugly. Right? He's not a good-looking guy, and it was just after Kennedy. Look, when Muhammad Ali retired, Larry Holmes couldn't get any love. Couldn't get any love. And one of the reasons why Larry Holmes was one of the best heavyweight champions of all time, couldn't get any love, is because he beat the fuck out of Muhammad Ali. And everybody was sad. And everybody hated him because of that. And you're never, like, if you're Nixon and you're following JFK who got shot in the fucking head, we got assassinated, someone assassinated the greatest president of all time, this good-looking guy who was going to really change things and didn't believe in secrecy and was talking to the American people like we have hope and dreams. He wants to put us on the moon, and he got shot in the head. Now we got this ugly fuck.
Well, there was LBJ in between there at least, but yes, no,
a little bit.
Well, I think also in hindsight, he wasn't that good looking. He also came off as kind of
well, I was going to say he's
figure.
Also very authoritarian.
Yeah,
which is unfortunately when you have a society where you do have ubiquitous crime, you do need some kind of an authoritarian leadership. Not saying you need tyranny, not saying you need a dictator, but you need fucking laws and you need rule of law. And sometimes those people come off very harsh and very uncaring and unloving, and the total opposite for like the reason why people voted for Jimmy Carter, I think, because Jimmy Carter represented like a genuinely sweet, good guy.
Right.
But like, look how that presidency was a disaster because they were all working against him for sure. And on top of that, it's like hard to like you gotta be a bit of a hard ass if you want to run the world. But the way Nixon did it, we're still suffering through that today. That motherfucker, he's partially responsible for that sweeping Schedule I Act of 1970. When they did that and they made everything illegal, everything Schedule I, including things that are 100% medicinal, like marijuana, all that fucked up society, and they did it specifically to target the anti-war movement and to target the civil rights movement. Specifically. So it's not like Nixon was the best.
Oh, no. Oh,
what he did was fucking horrible.
Nixon had a lot of policy failures, and I would put the number one, and I completely agree with you. I mean, launching the war on drugs was a disaster, but taking us off the gold standard was one of the worst policy decisions in the history of the United States of America. That is, we're so many of the problems we face now is because of that. And people could say, like, I've heard Pat Buchanan defend Nixon on this before. Pat Buchanan was in the Nixon administration. He was a speechwriter for him. And he was like, well, look, what were we going to do at that point? And so he was basically saying, because what happened was essentially, so you had like the Bretton Woods Agreement, which started after World War II. Or actually, I'm sorry, it started at the very end of World War II. It was in 1944, where they had the Bretton Woods Agreement, where they could kind of see where World War II was going. And it was basically like, okay, well, all of Europe is destroyed, and a lot of Asia is destroyed, or not yet. I guess this is 44, but it was getting there. And America had, at least on the homeland, hadn't really been touched. And we had like a wild amount of the world's gold. And so the deal was essentially that like we will peg the dollar to gold at $35 an ounce. Everyone else can peg their currency to the dollar. And then the dollars are refundable. You can get an ounce for $35. And so that, was whatever. There were problems with the Bretton Woods Agreement, but that was what stood from after World War II so from 1944 to 1973 or 1971 when he took us off the gold standard. And so essentially what happened was through the 60s, we started cheating. And it became very obvious to the world that we were like, in the 1960s, you're like, you have the Great Society. So we created Medicare and Medicaid, and we went to the moon, and we were fighting the war in Vietnam, and we were just printing money for all of this, which is, what we still do to this day. But so essentially the Europeans started looking at us, and they were like, I don't think you got enough gold to cover all these dollars that you're printing around.
Wasn't that a thing where they were going to, like, do an audit of Fort Knox that we never heard about?
Well, what I know is that I'm pretty sure it was the French, might have been the British too, but it was definitely the French. The French basically called our bluff. And they just went, okay, we'll take gold. You know, we got all these dollars. We'll take gold. We get an ounce for every $35 dollars that we have. And we have quite a lot. And that's when Nixon went, no. Like, no. He just basically defaulted in front of the entire world. And he said he's temporarily suspending the convertibility of dollars into gold. And they framed it as like, you know, the French are attacking the stability of the dollar. Really, all they were doing was calling us on our agreement. We owed it to them.
We're like, we got so much gold, bro.
So Pat Buchanan says, defending his boy, Richard Nixon, he goes, well, what were we going to do at that point? Let him clean us out of all of our gold and just not be the dominant power? But I think the retort to that is, yeah. Like, that's what you should have done, because the decision to go off of the gold standard essentially just said, well, now there's no more even pretend limits on government. You know, this is why Ron Paul, who, happy birthday to the greatest living American hero, just turned 90. And I was just at his birthday party a few weeks ago. And
damn, look at you partying with Ron Paul.
Dude, that dude throws it down. No, I'm just kidding. It was very nice, though, to see him. Tulsi Gabbard was there, which was cool. But so essentially, right, that was the last restraint on government, is that at least even then, even under Bretton Woods when we're cheating, at least there's some feeling of like, well, don't cheat too bad, because they could maybe try to, you know, like
count the gold.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But after that, it was off to the races. And this is why Ron Paul ran for Congress. It was when Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. And then he was like, this is going to lead to big government. This is going to be the era of big government. So he was going to run to try to stop that. And he was completely right. You know, this is what has really destroyed everything, is that there's just no, and it's a big part of the reason why I'm so angry about all these wars too, because it's all related. You know, the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, or the Federal Reserve Act was signed into law by Woodrow Wilson in 1913. And then in 1914, I think, is when it actually got up and running. And in 1914 is when the income tax was passed, also signed into law by Woodrow Wilson. And 3 years later is World War I. The banking system and the tax system are very, like, interrelated with the warfare state. Like, you need this stuff in order to fight wars. Over the last 25 years, we've spent close to $10 trillion on wars, you know, and they didn't tax the American people for that. Because they know they couldn't tax us enough to pay. We would put an end to it. If they tried to raise everybody's taxes enough to come up with $10 trillion because we want to go fight regime change wars all over the Middle East,